Creativity and originality are the cornerstones of art and design. However, there appears to be a trend recently of the familiar being repurposed and repackaged for a modern audience. Stories previously confined to the panels of comic books are finally making their way to the big screen and are rapidly becoming the most successful movies of all time. Comparably, the all-consuming media conglomerate Disney has in the past few years embarked on a campaign of remaking many of the classic films of the company's past. A notable example of this being 2019's The Lion King grossing $1.6 billion at the worldwide box office and becoming the most successful animated feature film of all time. In this essay, I intend to examine the role of appropriation and originality, whether there is a lack of depth of creativity in modern visual culture, and how the concept of originality should be considered in a contemporary context. Taking the Old Testament at face value, Adam and Eve were the first two human beings in the world. No words had yet been spoken and no artistic endeavours pursued. Adam and Eve, unlike every creative alive today, did not suffer the existential anguish of being condemned to the Sisyphean task of eternally reinventing the wheel. The essential conditions for truly original fabrication, silence and emptiness, are in sparse supply now. Anything approaching something close to absolute originality these days, and at least for the past several hundred years, has narrowed to an extraordinary degree. The Cambridge English Dictionary defines originality as the quality of being special and interesting and not the same as anything or anyone else. Whether something is special or interesting, however, is a highly subjective topic. Some alterations to the definition, at least for the sake of discussion, must be applied. New York-based contemporary artist Jonathan Lewis' thoughts on originality, as recollected in Robert Shore's book Beg, Steal, Borrow, Artists Against Originality, reads as such. As far as I'm concerned, originality just means something I haven't seen before. It can be based on something else, but the person doing it has to have added something a bit different, something with a bit of inspiration for it to be classed as original. Lewis goes on to discuss the concept of originality utilising processes of careful selection and recontextualisation, or taking a primary source and turning it into something new and demonstrably different. Lewis refers to this as copying with benefits. Marcel Duchamp is an artist well known for such selection and recontextualisation. His work Fountain is a perfect example of this. Take a standard bathroom appliance, flip it on its side, sign it, sling it in a gallery, it is now art. Fountain is seen as a quintessential example of what Duchamp would call a ready-made, an ordinary object, not a unique item, designated by the artist as a work of art. Duchamp's work dealt with ideas. Essentially, it was a question of his choosing the object to be art and not just a urinal that made it so. The only labour of alteration made by Duchamp in this case was his signing the side with the now infamous R.L. Mutt. Interestingly, this idea of a ready-made had already been done by Duchamp in his earlier work 1914's Bottle Rack, making Fountain in many ways debatably unoriginal. Using this example of Duchamp's work as a starting point, I carried out some primary research in a bid to gain some insight into the subject of what constitutes original work in a modern context. To do this, I gathered a group of 5 individuals for a group interview. The group consisted of 4th-year communication design and contemporary art practice students. Starting with an illustration of the popular comic book character Batman drawn by artist Jim Lee, I asked for the group's thoughts on whether this should be considered an original artwork. I've got this drawing here, right? That's Batman. It's drawn by Jim Lee. Okay, it's not important, but so point is, would we consider this to be an original artwork? He drew it?
Yeah, because if he made it.
Not necessarily.
Okay.
He might not have the idea. Do you know what I mean? Like.
Well, I'm quite into Batman.
The idea. See, that's a really interesting way of putting it. So.
Yeah.
If he physically put pen and paper and drew it, but someone else, let's say,
gave him
had drawn something very similar, but it was someone different.
Yeah.
It wasn't Batman, but it was someone else.
Mm-hmm.
But they drew something very similar. It would be less original in your.
No, because people can take things completely differently.
By this, she contested that even if the posing and framing of the piece were sourced from a pre-existing work, Lee's expression of it was still original and his own, contradicting herself somewhat. Despite the contradiction, I would argue that art history is on her side. Observing the bottom right quadrant of this work by Raimondi, we see 3 individuals casually enjoying a nude picnic. The posing and spacing of these individuals in this setting would 300 years later be utilised by Manet in the painting Le Déjeuner sur l'herbe. These same poses would later then be directly imitated and commented on by Flock. By observing these as a series of 3, we can showcase the path of copying that has taken place. Manet undeniably took the posing employed by Raimondi, but by substituting new figures in the place of the old ones, the reading of the image becomes innovative and different. The version of the work by Flock, in turn, dramatically changes the reading of the image, becoming a rather humanist commentary on the nude female present in the Manet piece. Placing a nude woman viewing said piece essentially makes a joke out of the presence of nudity in the setting. This is an example of appropriation leading to further creative development. Robert Short alludes in Beg, Borrow, Steal to the first president of the Royal Academy in London in the year 1768, Sir Joshua Reynolds, who unapologetically copied poses from the paintings and sculptures of old masters. Sir Reynolds would state regarding this practice, "It is by being conversant with the invention of others that we learn to invent." Among modern artists, Baltus incorporated elements of The Nightmare in his work The Room. Zsolt Bodoni is an example of a contemporary artist who has also reimagined this particular piece. Bodoni's working process is based on an analysis of the past that functions as a kind of archaeology. By engaging with art history and music, his work is both a means of understanding and a process of recreation through forging a new view of the past from the perspective of the present. Bodoni's paintings are more like a performance, much as classical musicians revisit musical scores. The starting point is the reworking of old masters. First, Bodoni attempts to peer beneath the glaze of the original, searching for the skeleton underneath. Then from his own reproduction he invents new elements or changes their proportions, shifting our reading of the past and redefining our understanding of originality. A level of consideration has gone into the composition. The figure's knee is bent at a right angle and appears more akin to the later iteration of the piece, reflecting how the image has been differently exposed over time. A modern viewing of Fuseli's original is now understood to be inspired by sleep paralysis. With this modern understanding of the previous work, Bodoni approaches the work in his own way. The alteration of the imp-like creature on the woman's chest now takes the form of a monkey, a real animal of which humanity possesses a far greater understanding. This is compounded by the decision to present the female figure as nude, as this again points to the natural origin of the imagery and moves away from the supernatural elements of the original. This could also have been informed by the version by Baltus in which the female figure appears nude. All of this I find to be thematically presenting that the piece is relating to sleep paralysis, a natural occurrence and not a supernatural phenomenon. Similar to the Raimondi, Mani, Flock example previously, we can observe a chronology with regards to many of the visual aspects of the eventual Bodoni work. The position and posing of the model, as well as the overall greater presence of light visible in the painting, seem to have emerged from the interpretation of the image presented by Baltus. How could the initial owners of the Mona Lisa copy present in the Museo del Prado conceptualise the relationship between the original and their version? The answer simply is that they didn't know what it looked like. This of course was before cameras or art magazines. Concepts concerning relationships between originals and remakes can be explored in this way. At this point I would introduce Kimba the White Lion into my argument. A Japanese anime series running from 1965 to 1967 based on the manga from 1950 to 1954, which bears a striking similarity to the Disney film. Kimba even sounds eerily similar to Simba, the protagonist of The Lion King. However, if such a small audience in the West would have seen Kimba the White Lion, this raises a question of how a Western audience could conceptualise a relationship between the two. During my research group I would address this. Do you have nostalgic affection for the first Lion King?
Yeah,
I do.
Totally.
Has it now changed your opinion knowing that there's Kimba the White Lion?
It makes me a bit sad.
Does it really?
To be honest, because I feel like I had that connection, and it's like that kind of like was part of my life, and now it's like it's all a lie. Like,
Okay,
yeah,
that's not what I was expecting. But
it's
that's not. That's
it's like now I'm kind of like disappointed actually.
Quoting again from Walter Benjamin's essay, The Work of Art in the Age of Mechanical Reproduction, situations into which the product of mechanical reproduction can be brought may not touch the actual work of art, yet the quality of its presence is always depreciated. Whilst this statement by Benjamin relates to a physical reproduction of an image, I find that this conceit is applicable to intellectual property also. The direct appropriation of ideas may not affect the quality of what is later produced, yet it is interesting to consider the depreciation of appreciation for the work when presented with the information that the genesis of the idea is derived from elsewhere.
But it's still the original to you. It's
Yeah.
the first one that it's the first one that you saw. You witnessed the first one that you remember.
Yeah.
And that's interesting. And then there's also always a chance that there is another original before the other.
Thank you for leading me on to my next point. This brings the topic full circle back to Hamlet and William Shakespeare. Walt Disney and William Shakespeare may at first seem like a couple of strange bedfellows. However, examining The Lion King and Hamlet, the essential plots are the same. The king's brother conspires to kill the king and take the throne, only to be later overcome by the son of the king. Alexandre Dumas, the French author responsible for The Three Musketeers, once majestically proclaimed, After God, Shakespeare created most. Examining his works closely, however, uncovers many occasions of auspicious appropriation on Shakespeare's part. When coming to write the tragedy of Antony and Cleopatra, Shakespeare was undoubtedly looking over the shoulder of the boy sat next to him, observably exhibiting a reliance on Plutarch's Life of Caius from Lives of the Noble Grecians and Romans. Had Shakespeare written Antony and Cleopatra in the late 1970s, it would most likely have been heralded as a postmodern commentary on the equivocal nature of originality. Regardless, this is a great example of creative borrowing leading to further creative borrowing. This example of The Lion King sets an interesting precedent to be considered regarding works of art that are better known or sometimes known solely to the world at large through copies. The previously mentioned fountain by Duchamp present in the Tate Gallery is worth noting as a recreation and not the original item. Yet visitors of the Tate undoubtedly ogle the exhibit with identical vigour to that which would be felt towards the original. This could be considered the inverse of Benjamin's thoughts on the subject. The item itself is a reproduction, yet the ideas behind it are unaffected. Art historian Sir Kenneth Clark noted that whilst working on a sculpture for the tomb of Pope Julius II, the inimitable imitator Michelangelo, quote, went to Rome in 1496 and was so overcome by what he saw that he made imitations of Greco-Roman sculpture, one of which, now lost, was actually sold as an antique, the first recorded fake. This is relevant as I feel it sets a precedent that even copies can develop auras. I find this challenges Benjamin's point regarding the aura of a reproduction. That which withers in the age of mechanical reproduction is the aura of the work of art. This is a symptomatic process whose significance points beyond the realm of art. Often, as is the case with The Lion King 2019, the copy of an artwork can overtake the original in terms of appeal. The Lion King 1994 had a worldwide box office of $968 million. The Lion King 2019, $1.6 billion. Elaine Sturtevant's Crying Girl sold for a whopping $710,500 in 2011 versus Roy Lichtenstein's version scraping a measly $78,400 in 2007. It seems as though audiences prefer remakes in the fine art world. Were Michelangelo's copy of the sculpture mentioned still in circulation today, it would undoubtedly fetch a price far greater than the original if Crying Girl is anything to go by. It seems exceedingly far-fetched to believe that anyone would choose the anonymous initial iteration over the celebrated artist's fake. In his book The Hero with a Thousand Faces, Joseph Campbell proposed that without detracting from the great artists and storytellers of history, it is observable that the stories and ideas presented by even the finest of them are not their own. Their talents lie in their ability to dress up the themes which are already latent, not only in their minds but in those of the audience. Stories that take shape in the human mind form around certain archetypical patterns and images which are common property of mankind. At the base level, the message which they are putting across is the same. This is true for artists in all mediums. Whilst fascinating, this is all hypothetical chatter, albeit by genius minds. Scientific investigation into the subject offers a different lens through which to view the subject of creativity and originality. Ideas don't come out of the ether. Albert Rothenberg, an American psychiatrist who has spent his professional career studying creativity in humans, has identified a potential cause of creativity which he calls HOMO-SPATIAL thinking. Rothbergs describe it as actively conceiving two or more discrete entities occupying the same space, a conception leading to the articulation of new identities. Not entirely dissimilar to Jonathan Lewis's conceit of selection and recontextualization. Ideas emerge from a specific way of thinking. They come when we encourage our brain to combine two or more apparently random elements in a new way through a mixture of disruption and application. Moreover, psychologist Demi Hasibis' findings on the subject of retrieval of factual information reasoned that organisational elements known to be fundamental to recollecting episodic information from autobiographical memory are also required to construct imaginary events. Essentially, the same areas of the brain are active when imagining something as remembering. This is thought to be the reason for most memories being highly inaccurate, as people often imagine what they are convinced they are remembering. The inverse of this is also true. To compare and contrast the ideas put forward by Hasibis and the concept of the existence of only 7 basic narratives, I created 3 short videos using the most basic of illustrative device: circles, squares and rectangles. These video files were presented to the interview group and they were asked the question of what exactly the story was going on in the said videos.
Okay, so it looked like a little bunch of green circles couldn't be there when the square was there. It was like the square came in, was like bye, the green circles like went off, and then the blue circle came in, got rid of the red square, and then the blue circles came back in again. It was like
celebrate.
Yeah, it's like the blue circle was like there to help.
I saw the red square as kind of like a bully almost, and then the blue one was like, hey, not cool.
Yeah, that's exactly how I saw it.
That's interesting. Why did you see it as like a bully?
Because
it came in and hit it down, and then as soon as it was down, it was like the green circles came back again, and they were there together. It was like protecting them.
I think it's maybe also because of like, you know, a lot of stories will be like a bully, or like say like the wolf and the three pigs. Because originally I was like, oh, they're just running away, but then the blue dot came in and like stopped it.
This highlights a tendency to adhere to schemas present concerning what should and shouldn't happen in the narrative based on what she has been exposed to in the past. The participant could not help but think of a pre-existing narrative in her brain, in this case comparing the video to the story of the wolf and the three pigs that many are exposed to as children. This initial video depicted what Christopher Booker refers to in his text, the 7 basic plots, as overcoming the monster, in which an outside antagonistic force challenges the status quo but is dispatched and a new status quo is established following the demise of said monster.
Transformation.
Yeah.
I got the transformation as well. See, the disappearing part makes me think it's like gone somewhere, like it's travelled in time and then it's changed because of its experience.
Or is it like a bath? Like it's getting cleaned?
Transformation and the bath. Whilst amusing, this would still constitute a transformation, therefore the responses are interchangeable. The basic plot of Rebirth as described by Booker concerns a hero or a heroine falls under a dark spell which eventually traps them in some wintry state, akin to living death, physical or spiritual imprisonment, sickness, or some other form of enchantment. This was expressed in my video piece by the singular green circle moving subtly more slowly in the beginning and appearing in a darker drab shade of greenish grey. Then a miraculous act of redemption takes place and the character, figuratively or metaphorically, is transformed. This is represented by the circle emerging a brighter vivid green and subtly moving more energetically.
It may just be because I've watched too many videos like this. These series of videos where basically it's like dating apps or Tinder or stuff, but in person. But like basically there's a line, and then like just the fact that then like 2 of the circles joined together and like became a pair, like, you know, they found their match sort of thing. The blue dot's choosing.
The initial statement of having already seen videos similar immediately expresses her mind being incapable of imagining events without some sort of recollection to base them on. Video 3 was intended to represent the archetypical rags to riches story. Key factors of this plot concern the central figure starting with nothing and ending up with something. The prince shall obtain his princess and succeed to some kind of inheritance or domain. Sometimes this is as simple as the off-cited and they lived happily ever after slogan. As we can see when comparing these descriptions of the events depicted in my videos, they closely adhere to the basic description of the corresponding stories given by Booker in the 7 basic plots. The responses also coincide with the findings of Hesibus, as they are imagining the events of the story depicted by the video, but their imagination is influenced largely, if not completely, by their existing thoughts on what they think they should be making of the story they have just seen. My argument is that it is basically just nameless, pointless objects moving on a screen which had no reason and no story, but the people involved would themselves attach a story to said objects. It is the hypothesis of many learned minds in the psychology community that imagination and memory are such similar processes in the brain that they become interchangeable. A person may believe themselves to be imagining something from out of nowhere when in reality that person is recalling an event or image, or a combination of various parts which they have melted together in their brain. The idea generated from a combination of ideas, however, is their own and should then be considered original.
Ding, 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 ding. Theirs goes. Ours goes. Little bitty change. It's not the same.
Returning to Jonathan Lewis' description of what constitutes a work being considered original leads me now to the discussion of what it takes for a work to no longer be a copy and to be rightfully considered now original. A Telegraph article referring to all 3 2014 Turner Prize nominees contested, looking at their work, you get a sense that the old idea of making things that didn't exist before from scratch has been pretty much abandoned. The winner in question of that particular year being Duncan Campbell's It for Others, a film piece making use of appropriated footage in addition to video filmed specifically for his project. Campbell has also stated that his work is based on the French piece Le Statut Mourant Assez, making this arguably a copy of that previous work. Art critic John Ruskin, in his essay Of Ideas of Power and Modern Painters, 1843 to 1860, expresses conviction that value of work of art is in some way dependent on the labour of its production. It is fair to say that Ruskin would not have been okay with appropriating footage. However, I find this to be an oversimplification of the process. Said appropriated footage was selected carefully for what it represents. On top of this, it is combined with brand new video. Comparably, the cinematography is in a much different style than that of Le Statue Morant, even if it was inspired by such. Similar to the previously mentioned cases of Flock, Bodoni and The Lion King, there can be traced a lineage of the appropriation that was pertinent to the construction of the work. Appropriation was undeniably key to the creation of it for others, but that appropriation then led to further creative output. Returning to my interview group, I this time presented them with the same image of Batman used previously, but with the alteration of my having photoshopped the head of comedian Zach Galifianakis over Batman's face. I asked for their opinion whether this should now be considered my original artwork, to which they immediately unanimously replied yes. I photoshopped Zach Galifianakis' head onto that same drawing. Would this now be okay for me to broadcast as my original work, or is it?
Yeah, I would say. The whole artwork in general, like the edit and everything, was Jack that did it. And he sourced all of the elements.
I was reading about.
The thought process behind this particular work of mine was inspired somewhat by Duchamp's LHOOQ. By defacing the original piece in the form of drawing a moustache and beard on the face of the portrait, the message conveyed to the audience varies drastically from what was presented by Leonardo da Vinci's originally. Additionally, of intrigue to me was the group's thoughts on Ruskin's expressions of value of work of art dependent on its labour. All Duchamp did was squiggle a moustache, all I did was Photoshop a head on.
Source all of the elements.
I was reading about, and what he does is he trolls through Instagram, picks artists' work, prints them out black and white, 6 foot tall, with emojis added on, and his work sells for around £200,000 to £400,000.
Right.
Mm-hmm. All he's done is turn it to black and white, add emojis and print it out.
Despite my best efforts, I have come up short on my quest to find examples of work by this guy, but I propose the point is still valid as I possess no reason to distrust this unnamed participant called Callum. What you said was, all he's done is... To say all he's done...
It's like he's not put any effort in it.
Yeah. It sounds
All he has
negative
done
almost.
is this, and he makes so much money from it. Whereas the original artist has put in however many more hours of work.
Is it enough that this is now my work and not Jim's Zach's face on it?
Because in comparison, he's put all of his work, time into doing that, but that was your idea. This one was your idea. You wanted to put Zach Galifianakis' face on that, and that was your artwork. It may have only taken you 5 minutes or whatever, but you can say it's yours. So
Okay, so it would be fair to say it's my original work. Okay.
It dramatically changes the whole image.
Yeah, it does.
The way you would interpret.
Yeah.
and create
It's not like you've gone and retraced that out in Photoshop or something and gone, look, here's all my layers, I've done this all myself. And trying to steal someone's artwork.
Okay.
Yeah.
This is absolutely modifying and changing.
Yeah.
It's like you're
artwork.
celebrating the artwork.
To quote Will Gompertz in the book, "Think like an artist and lead a more productive life." That's how ideas are generated. Unusual combinations, mixing old and new, stimulate original ideas. Right. So what I did here, I've literally, and I'm not, trying to fool you guys here and say that I didn't. I literally got a light box and traced it. Would it be fair of me to say that's, look what I did, that's my original artwork?
That's quite a difficult
Well, at the
one.
moment I would say no, but it doesn't mean that it can't be.
Yeah, if you did, I don't know, say change the colour or I don't know.
It's change anything.
You
You can keep what it is. You could turn this into, I suppose theoretically it is. Because you've got the pencil and the white paper.
Well, it's again, I physically put pencil to paper, and so I did make that, although I made it
through the inspiration and the lines that you
not even inspiration. It's just direct tracing it as.
Also, you have changed the image because there isn't any background.
Yep.
It's not a copy of it.
And so you've selected the parts that you need to read the image.
Yeah, which one it belongs to me more, I guess we could say.
I want to say that one because it took more hours.
This one because it took more hours. Yeah, that's an interesting way of putting it as well.
Did it not take more hours?
Yeah, it took. I don't know. That took maybe an hour. That took literally 3 minutes.
I'm getting like it's weird. I'm actually getting sort of like the opposite impression because
that's just.
It's the same. It's the same meaning. You're getting the same sort of reaction, whereas like this is completely different. Even though you've like copied the image and edited a bit, but like.
So would you say changing the meaning is a kind of big enough input versus this took more time?
Just because that's a different medium.
Yeah,
Yeah, and it took more time. I still think that one is
is
still.
Is there anything to be said about the amount of labour, for lack of a better word, that I put in? That was next to none. That was, I mean, it's not hard work, but that took some time. Is there anything to be said about that, and whether that's now like my work versus his?
Unfortunately, not.
No, you don't think so?
I don't think so. No.
Time doesn't mean a thing.
Yeah.
Especially.
This is the last image that I want to show you. So this is no longer Batman. It's just Zach just doing what he does on a Friday night. He's just throwing a spinning kick with a lightning bolt behind him. At this stage, is this now something that I could say, yeah, this is my work?
Absolutely, because
Absolutely.
looking at that, like the viewer, you can't tell that it was from an idea from
If
Batman.
you hadn't, I know it's kind of hard to
That's the
tell,
thing.
but if
It
you
does
hadn't seen that,
exactly. You don't know.
Yeah.
You don't know that you got the idea from Batman. You went through these stages. That just looks like you came up with that.
I just drew Zach doing that.
You know, the pose is still there and stuff, but like in the end, like you're just inspired by.
To quote John Berger in his book Ways of Seeing, for the first time ever, images of art have become ephemeral, ubiquitous, insubstantial, available, valueless, free. That comment was made all the way back in 1972, and his comments were leading on from an essay, The Work of Art in the Age of Mechanical Reproduction by Walter Benjamin from the mid-1930s, which I have referenced repeatedly. In a modern context, Shore would have this to say: "The digital age is the sharing age. Online, people will share your work and ideas whether you want them to or not. The idea of property resonates differently in the virtual world. For many, taking something that has no weight or fixed physical dimensions is not a transgressive act. People whose moral sense would not allow them to steal someone else's handbag will readily, for instance, download an album of new music without paying for it, in part because they are not stealing a unique original or even one of a finite number of examples, but merely taking a copy of something that is infinitely reproducible." Berger's comments were concerning the reproduction of notable artworks in the form of pamphlets, magazine articles, brochures and the like. Since the advent of the internet, those images have become even more insubstantial, available, valueless and free. Online images are ubiquitous, and the notion of the physical original is virtually abolished. Modern visual culture is the process of appropriating appropriations. The age of digitalization has increasingly facilitated borrowing, recycling and remixing. Information technology has generalized sampling, photoshopping, copying and pasting. Quoting Walter Benjamin again, "Quantity has now become quality. The very much greater masses of participants have produced a changed kind of participation." This was said in the early 20th century, but I find there is evidence to suggest that this is more the case now than ever before. Social media platforms, notably YouTube and Instagram, make use of automated algorithms that reward consistent output, leading to many creators making a habit of daily production, the quality of which often falters, but the algorithm does not and cannot distinguish garbage from gold. It promotes instead mass production, not fine production. And yet users are spending more time than ever engaged with social media. Clearly there is demand for this type of creative content. The ever-eroding attention span of the general public lends itself to this increased consumption, and where there is consumption there must also be production. However, this is surface content, not creative visual art. To quote artist Mishka Henner, "The internet has increased the rate of appropriation 1,000-fold. Relationship between appropriated material and appropriating artist has grown more openly subjective and personally expressive. This subjectivity, however, is the point of utilising the pre-existing in order to conjugate further creative endeavours." Richard Dawkins' explanation of a meme as taken from The Selfish Gene 1976 reads, "A gene propagating themselves through a process of continuous mutation and blending. A work of art, like a gene, will die out if it is too unique. I find this to be evidenced by the numerous examples of certain levels of creative appropriation having been traced through the history of visual art." A Apparently, no later than the mid-15th century was the last point in time where it was possible for a human to master the entirety of recorded knowledge before Gutenberg innovation fast-tracked human learning. The amount of knowledge and information present now is so staggeringly huge that the concept of conjuring a truly non-derivative idea from the ether is nigh inconceivable. My proposition contests that in essence it is impossible for anything to be entirely original at this stage in history. It is apt to note that artists and designers inevitably copy since they operate within a fixed historical context of art and design. Every idea has been done and every story told. There exists text to support this. Among these central academic sources I have utilised throughout the writing of this essay include The 7 Basic Plots by Christopher Booker, Beg, Steal and Borrow, Artists Against Originality by Robert Shore, Ways of Seeing by John Berger, The Work of Art in the Age of Mechanical Reproduction by Walter Benjamin, and The Hero with 1,000 Faces by Joseph Campbell. The key notion with appropriation in regard to creation is thus one of transformation, a paradoxical uniqueness which proceeds from copying. The form is repeated, but the feeling is different and new. At this stage, however, the evidence utilised, that being cold hard revenue generated as this info is indisputable, shows an audience desire for the familiar in cinema, animation, illustration, and other facets of modern visual culture. The results of research conducted into the field of psychology seems to compound this viewpoint. I have presented evidence that whilst it has been the case for hundreds of years that nothing can be original, the cycle of reworking and rehashing of the same ideas has undeniably sped up since the dawn of the internet in mainstream society. Nevertheless, I would argue that this is only symptomatic on a base level. When examining contemporary visual culture more deeply, I feel it is a much more complex relationship that exists between appropriation and originality. Whilst there is a case to be made about the oversaturation of media, the point could be argued that there is a greater depth of originality in modern visual culture than ever before. The ease of access undoubtedly offers the temptation to steal, but for those engaged it also offers a vast well of source material for the possibility of selecting, reworking and reimagining. Selective appropriation is essential for the creative process.